There are days I wake up thinking about this. Why do I keep getting up to go to work? Why do I care so much about making something of my life? Why do I want to leave something behind? And above all, why does any of it seem to matter so much, if one day I will not be here? I have never liked these thoughts, not because they frighten me, because they arrive without knocking. For a long time I thought it was just pessimism, or one of those days when nothing seems to make sense. But the more I thought about it, the more questions turned up. If one day I will not be here, why do I bother? Why do I want to build anything? Why do I keep making plans for 10 years from now? Maybe this happens because I am tired, or because I work too much, or because sleeping badly changes the way we think. But then there is something strange. There are days when I am happy, and the question shows up exactly the same. That is when I realised I had it backwards. If it comes on the bad days and the good days, then tiredness is not what makes it. Tiredness only makes it harder to ignore, so I went looking in psychology. I was expecting a name for it. Some disorder, something with a list of symptoms and a treatment at the end. That is not what I found. I found the brain. I spent about a week reading things I only half understood, and the same idea kept coming back. The brain does something odd. It does not only live in the present, it spends an enormous amount of time simulating possible futures, replaying old conversations, imagining scenes that never happened. There is a set of brain regions that becomes more active precisely when we are not concentrating on anything. It is called the default mode network. I had to read that page twice, and here is the part that got me. It was probably this same ability that let us build cities, invent science, plan decades ahead. I was pleased with myself for a few days. I had an explanation with a name and a brain map. That feels good. Then I understood what I actually had in my hands. It explains why the question turns up in traffic and not in the middle of a meeting. It explains the moment. It does not answer the question. Knowing that my brain simulates futures when it is idle tells me absolutely nothing about whether any of those futures matter. I had a very good answer to the wrong question, so I went further back, and I found something that should have been obvious, and was not. This is not a modern problem. For more than 2,000 years people have been writing about exactly this. The Stoics, the Buddhists, much later, the existentialists, who made this question their entire subject. Each of them arrived somewhere different, but almost all of them started from the same question. And in the middle of all that, one word kept appearing that I did not want to read. Nihilism. I will admit my first reaction. Another word invented by philosophers to make something simple sound complicated. I skipped past it 2 or 3 times before I read it properly. When I finally did, what I had in my head was the film version. The nihilist is the guy who thinks nothing is worth anything, wears black, does not vote, answers everything with a shrug. Someone who gave up and turned giving up into a position. That is what I thought, and it was a comfortable idea because it left me out of it. I am not like that. That is not it. Or at least, that is not what the people who actually use the word seem to mean by it. Nihilism is not an attitude. It is a question, and it is far narrower than it sounds. It asks whether there is a meaning written into the universe itself, a purpose out there, independent of us, waiting to be found the way a mountain is found. Notice what it is not saying. It does not say nothing exists. It does not say nobody can have a reason to get up in the morning. It says only that the reason does not come from outside, and a person can believe exactly that and still fall in love, have children, spend 15 years building a company, write a book nobody may ever read. None of that is a contradiction. And that is precisely what I could not file away. Because if meaning is not written out there, then 2 people can reach exactly the same conclusion and walk out of it in opposite directions. One thinks, then nothing matters. The other thinks, then I am the one who decides what matters. Reality is the same in both cases. Nobody discovered anything new. The only thing that changed is what they did with the information. And I know both of those people. One has spent the last few years shrinking, cutting things out, waiting for it to pass. The other started learning piano at 43. No talent at all, and no intention of ever playing for anyone. If you ask them, they would both say exactly the same thing about the universe. It was impossible to keep going without running into Nietzsche, and I had been avoiding him because of the line. Everyone knows the line. I knew the line, and nothing else. What surprised me was that he was not celebrating anything. He was not trying to convince anyone that nothing mattered. What worried him was something else, and far more practical than I expected. What worried him was the gap, the stretch where the old explanations no longer hold, and the new ones have not been built yet. Not the moment the answer is lost. The time spent without one. He was watching a whole continent walk, out of an explanation that had lasted 1,500 years, and noticing that nobody had dealt with what came next. It was not a problem of faith. It was a hole that nobody yet knew how to fill, and I realised I was inside it. Not in a crisis, nothing dramatic, just in the gap. The explanations I grew up with do not work for me anymore. And I have not built anything on top, and here is where I disagree with something you hear everywhere. People say very easily that each of us creates our own meaning. It turns up in books, in photo captions, in conversations at the end of dinner. It sounds liberating, but look at what that sentence is asking for. It is asking one person to do alone, with no instructions and no help, something that for thousands of years was done by entire societies, with religions, rituals and calendars holding it all up. That is not freedom. That is a responsibility nobody prepares us for. I am not saying it should not be done. I am saying it gets repeated as though it were simple, and it is not, and the people who say it almost never explain how. It was the first time the question felt reasonable to me instead of morbid. I closed the laptop halfway through a Saturday afternoon, without having got anywhere, and I was left with something I cannot file away. I still call my parents on Sundays. I still feel bad when a friend is having a hard time. I am still curious. For a few days I thought that was the answer, that it proved something about what matters, even if I could not explain what. But it proves nothing. It could just be habit. It could just be what a social animal does by default, with no reason behind it. And what bothers me is not that I cannot tell which of the two it is. It is that from the inside, they are exactly the same. Tomorrow morning, the alarm will go off again. I will get up, I will make coffee, I will answer messages, I will carry on making plans for a future that may never come, and probably, at some point in the day, I will ask it again. What's the point?